Order. We now come to the general debate on legislating for the withdrawal agreement. To move the motion, I call the Minister Suella Braverman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a great pleasure, Mr. Speaker, to open this debate. The Government published the White Paper on legislating for the withdrawal agreement in July, and subsequently the Secretary of State made a statement. Over the summer, we have made further progress in the negotiations. The vast majority of the withdrawal agreement has now been agreed. Progress has been made across a range of outstanding separation issues. And at the same time, we continue to work on backstop arrangements to deal with issues related to the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. Let me reiterate that it is unacceptable for a customs border to be drawn along the Irish Sea, as that would be a direct threat to the territorial integrity of this country. This House... Yes.
Talking of border, I wonder whether the Minister could just enlighten us. What passport queues will British citizens arriving in France, Germany and Spain next year use, EU ones or non-EU ones, and what passport queues will EU citizens use coming into the UK?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and as he will hear, hopefully, in the contents of my speech, we are proposing an implementation period from March 2019 until the end of 2020, which will mean that we will continue to operate our immigration rules and our customs rules broadly as they do now, and I hope that satisfies his inquiry. This question, if I could continue, and please, if he still has outstanding questions, please raise them again with me later. This House will be aware that the Government has also taken steps to prepare for the unlikely event of being unable to reach a deal with the EU, and has published a series of technical notices to inform people, businesses and stakeholders of the steps they would need to take in this event. A no-deal outcome is not what we want, and the Government's priority is to achieve a deal with the EU. I remain confident that a deal with this House can support is within our reach, and that is what I am here to discuss today.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. She says that the Government have published notices. Last week, the Secretary of State told us in this House that the medicine notices covered stockpiling. I looked at the medicine notices and I could see no reference to stockpiling. In which notice is the issue of medicine stockpiling set out?
I thank the honourable lady for her question. I just want to gently remind her that no-deal planning and the technical notices are not the subject of this debate. We are here today to talk about the contents of the White Paper that was published before the end of the last session, which covers the implementation period, the proposals for EU citizens and the financial settlement. That's what I'm here to talk about, and I would ask her gently to keep to the subject matter of the debate. The EU withdrawal... I'm going to proceed, Madam Speaker. The EU Withdrawal Agreement Bill is a vital part of our exit. Its purpose is simple: to implement the agreement we reach with the EU into domestic law. It is the means by which we will protect the rights of EU citizens in this country, pay the negotiated financial settlement, and enter into an implementation period which is strictly time-limited to prepare for the future relationship. If Parliament votes in favour of the deal, we will introduce the Withdrawal Agreement Bill to give the withdrawal agreement domestic legal effect.
I thank the Minister for giving way. She's asked us to focus on the subject of the debate, and she just mentioned the supposed deal that's going to be put to Parliament. Can she explain how on earth that deal is going to proceed when 80, supposedly, of her own colleagues, including members of her own ERG group, her former ministerial colleague, the member for Wickham and others, have said that they're going to vote against it? Isn't the reality that Prime Minister Checker's deal is dead, that we're heading for a disastrous no deal, and that's exactly why we need a people's vote on the deal?
Well, I disagree with the honourable gentleman on his suggestion for a second referendum. That would be a complete betrayal of the voters, because we had that exercise and that was 2 years ago. And I'm optimistic that we are going to strike a mutually beneficial free trade agreement with the EU, which honours the result of the referendum, which retains the territorial integrity of our country, and which enables a smooth withdrawal from the EU. I'm going to make some progress, and I will come back to him, and I will also come back to If Parliament votes in favour of the deal, we will introduce the Withdrawal Agreement Bill to give the Withdrawal Agreement domestic legal effect. Any parliamentarian who is truly committed to delivering the people's decision to leave the EU will, I believe, find cause to vote in favour of this legislation, the Withdrawal Agreement Bill. The final content of this bill is, of course, subject to the outcome of the ongoing negotiations. We intend to introduce this bill as soon as possible after the negotiations have concluded and the deal has been approved by Parliament. The bill will need to reach royal assent before exit day if it is to give effect to the withdrawal agreement. It is precisely because this window of passage is constrained that we have published the White Paper. We want to maximise Parliament's ability to express its views on this legislation, including in advance of its introduction. Yes.
Minister, for giving me. Could she explain, would that bill have to pass this House completely unamended? For if there was an amendment to the bill, would that mean that the British government would have to go back and renegotiate with the European Union?
Well, I thank the Honourable for his question. The introduction of this bill will take place after Parliament has approved the terms of the final deal, the meaningful vote. And in that context, this bill will be introduced. It will go through the normal passage as all legislation goes through. And of course, views from parliamentarians are welcome. It can be amended and voted upon and scrutinised in the normal way. But it will always be set against the context of this Parliament having approved the final deal, which includes an approval of the withdrawal agreement. The colleagues will know I know, have taken the time over our summer recess to review this substantial document at greater length. Views and questions will have matured and crystallised, and I am therefore delighted to return to this topic today and listen to the views of the House. The Government's objective in publishing the White Paper was to set out how we intend to legislate for those parts of the withdrawal agreement which have already been settled in negotiations, those being citizens' rights, the implementation period and the financial settlement. It would not be appropriate for the White Paper... Yes.
Grateful to my honourable friend who just said what has been agreed so far, but am I right in understanding that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, and that remains an important principle?
My honourable friend is absolutely right in what he says, that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. And when I say that we have reached agreement with the EU on these sections, citizens' rights, implementation and financial settlement, I'm talking about the legal text of the withdrawal agreement, which is in the form of a draft international treaty. And members will be familiar with the screens of text which have been shaded in green, and progress has been made since the March European Council, which indicate agreement on the legal text and substance between the EU and the UK. It would not be appropriate for the White Paper to have attempted to cover those parts of the withdrawal agreement where negotiations are yet to conclude, but we will be seeking to keep Parliament informed as we make further progress. But let me be clear today that the Withdrawal Agreement Bill will be the primary means by which we give effect to the withdrawal agreement, including any backstop arrangements for Northern Ireland and Ireland.
Would the Minister agree that in order to help these very difficult negotiations with the EU, who don't like the Chequers proposals, it would be an extremely good idea as a matter of urgency to publish our tariff schedules for no deal so that they can see what it would look like, and so those of us who want to see us have import substitution would know they've got a better opportunity?
Well, I share my right honourable friend's passion for our country leaving the EU and our prospects outside of the EU, and I know he has considerable expertise in this issue. And I hope that he will be heartened by the technical notices that have been published over the summer, which take a step forward in setting out how our preparations are evolving in terms of that aspect of a no deal outcome. The Government is committed to working with the devolved administrations to ensure that this bill works for all parts of the UK. JMC-EN have already discussed proposals for the bill, and I look forward to continued engagement in the run-up to introduction and throughout the passage of the bill. Engagement has been constructive and positive, and we expect and intend for this to continue. We have also begun engagement with organisations and individuals on this bill over the summer. I've held roundtables with academics, legal practitioners and civil society organisations, and look forward to further engagement with a range of representative bodies this week. We will continue to work closely with all interested stakeholders to make sure we get this legislation right, and I look forward to further hearing the views of members of this House tomorrow. I will now turn to the detail of the White Paper. Firstly, Part 2 of the Withdrawal Agreement and Chapter 2 of the White Paper set out the arrangements for EU citizens living in the UK and UK nationals residing in the EU. A key step in providing a smooth and orderly exit from the EU is to provide certainty for these individuals and their families. That is why reaching an agreement on citizens' rights was the UK's first priority in negotiating its withdrawal. The agreement...
Wonderful. You're alluding. Unfortunately, I couldn't tell. I don't usually sit this far back. But obviously, if no withdrawal agreement is reached, then there is obviously no protection for citizens' rights. So, does the Minister agree that she should probably take the lead from Labour and remove citizen rights from the negotiations and make sure that these rights will be protected, regardless of whatever the final decision is?
I think for this government to take Labour's lead on anything to do with Brexit would be a serious derogation of our duty, because Labour doesn't have a plan, and Labour would completely let down this country if it was in charge of Brexit negotiations. We have prioritised the position of EU citizens from day one of these negotiations, and this agreement will safeguard these rights, and the withdrawal agreement will be the primary means by which the rights of EU citizens will be underpinned in the UK. Once enshrined in UK law, this agreement will give certainty to citizens on residency, access to healthcare, pensions and other benefits, meaning that EU citizens will continue to be able to live their lives broadly as they do today. Our message to EU citizens is clear. We value you, we thank you for your contribution to our country, and we want you to stay. Central to the Citizens' Rights Agreement is the right for EU citizens to continue living in this country. EU citizens lawfully residing in the UK at the end of the implementation period will be able to stay, and I welcome that since the publication of the White Paper, the EU settlement scheme is now being piloted in the northwest of England. This is an important step in delivering certainty to individuals and their families currently living in the country. The bill will ensure that EU citizens can rely on the rights set out in the withdrawal agreement and can enforce them in UK courts. It will also establish an independent monitoring authority to oversee the UK's implementation of the Citizens' Rights Deal, therefore providing further reassurance for citizens that their rights will be protected. This bill...
I thank the Minister for giving way. That's very generous. But can she explain, therefore, she seems to be saying that everything's certain, everything's sorted out and EU citizens should be reassured. Why then do the EU citizens living in my constituency of Bristol West tell me that they do not feel so reassured? Could it possibly be that her engagement over the summer did not include the EU citizens who live in this country?
Well, of course I am saddened to hear that she talks of her constituents in her area who don't feel reassured, and I do feel like the government has put it on the record, made it very clear, has carried out extensive outreach with diaspora groups, with EU citizens representative bodies, and worked with our opposite numbers on the continent to ensure that citizens both residing in the EU and those in the UK who are affected by this are aware of their situation and what their rights are going forward. The bill, as a piece of UK law, will only cover the arrangements applying to EU citizens in the UK. It is for the EU and its member states to implement these arrangements as they relate to UK nationals living in the EU. But let me reassure this House and the 800,000 UK nationals who have chosen to make their lives in other EU countries that both the UK government and the Commission are clear that providing certainty for citizens is a priority. Once fully agreed, the withdrawal agreement will become part of EU law, and the reciprocal commitments and safeguards we have agreed with the EU regarding UK nationals will be upheld through legislation in member states.
Grateful to the Minister for giving way. Would she agree with me? Would it be her hope and expectation that responsible members of this House would take every opportunity to reassure EU citizens living in this country, in our constituencies, that there is a secure future for them living and working and in this country?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. And when the Prime Minister herself has said, we value your contribution, we thank you for your presence in this country, and we want you to stay, I'm not quite sure what part of that honourable members on the other side fail to understand. Under the withdrawal agreement, any administrative procedures introduced for UK nationals are required to be smooth, transparent and simple to avoid unnecessary administrative burdens. The Government is working closely with the European Commission and individual member states to confirm the processes that will be in place. We will also be running an information campaign to let UK nationals know of any changes, for example, of how they should access services, and I would recommend that all UK nationals resident in the EU sign up for exit-related updates on gov.uk. They can also find a country-specific living-in guide for their member state of residence. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, I would now like to turn to the implementation period. Madam Deputy Speaker. The Government is committed to providing certainty.
Before she goes on to her next paragraph, on the question of family rights, because quite rightly, certain EU citizens have asked if their mother is very ill, can they come to the UK to be looked after? Could she give clarification on the point of the parents, elderly parents who wish to join their children here in the UK, who are EU citizens currently?
I do encourage the Honourable Lady to read the contents of the White Paper, which sets out in extensive detail the exhaustive and wide-ranging provisions covering EU citizens. Any member of this House who has constituents who are worried or who are anxious, please direct them to this document. This is agreed with the EU. It sets out the basis of the immigration status, it sets out their accessibility to benefits and pensions and healthcare, and it should go far in reassuring constituents such as the Honourable Ladies that, yes, those EU citizens who are currently in the country do have the right to stay under the provisions which are agreed and set out very clearly in plain English in this document. Lastly,
I appreciate the Minister being generous. I did want to ask her a very, very specific question. She talks about the assurances that have been given and why so many people are indeed worried. 3.5 million EU citizens, let alone other family members in the UK. The Home Office has told us in the Home Affairs Committee that the app for registering will only be available on Android and not on iPhones, which half the people use in this country. And the biometric permit's already seriously delayed in the Home Office, being printed on the same printers as the DVLA printers, and miles behind. How on earth should EU citizens have any confidence when they haven't made the basic practical provisions for registering and ensuring people can get that documentation?
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for raising this point, but that's precisely why the Home Office is leading a pilot, as we speak, of the settlement scheme in the North West to identify what's working for people and what isn't working. And that is proving so far to be successful. It's showing that there is a good uptake of the scheme so far, but of course it's still in its pilot stages, and the Home Office is very much in dialogue with the people who are directly affected to ensure that we iron it out and make it as simple, as user-friendly and as easy to use as possible. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, I would now like to turn...
I'm very grateful to her for giving way. One of the questions that the 1.2 million British people living in the EU are asking is what will be their entitlement to continuing medical care in the other member states in the event of there being no deal? What is the answer that she can give them?
Well, we are working towards a mutually beneficial agreement. The terms of the withdrawal agreement are mutual, so they apply equally to EU citizens in the UK as they do to UK citizens in the EU. And in the event of no deal, we would take strenuous steps, make every effort possible to reassure the position of UK citizens in the EU so that they would be able to enjoy the rights that they enjoy today. But we would definitely have to work hard to agree that with individual member states in the EU. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, I would now like to turn to the implementation period. The Government is committed to providing certainty and stability to businesses as part of a smooth and orderly exit, and we have been clear that they should only have to plan for one set of changes as the UK moves to the future relationship with our European partners. That is why we have agreed a strictly time-limited...
Would my honourable friend be able to throw some light in the
context of the exchanges that we had in the European Scrutiny Committee last Wednesday with the Secretary of State. Where there are changes to the rule book, how are people to know what those are going to be? What certainty will that provide when in practice they will be decided by 27 other member states behind closed doors without even so much as a transcript?
Well, my honourable friend raises an important point. He will know, as well as I do, that council directives and regulations which will apply and come into effect in the UK during the implementation period are currently going through their scrutiny process in the EU now. And so we will have played a part and participated in their development on many of those rules that may come into effect. But if I can just finish, for those rules where we feel there may be an adverse effect or we haven't had sufficient say, we are of course committed to enabling parliamentary scrutiny, and we are looking forward to discussing those options and views with members of this House.
On that very point. Of course, she's just conceded that there will be a joint committee, though she didn't say that, but in practice that's the way it will work. But what I'm talking about is changes to the rule book, because if the 27 decide, and we've accepted by way of international obligation that we will accept those, then I don't see how we're going to be able to prevent them, and the parliamentary lock will simply be a farce.
Well, when it comes to the implementation period, my honourable friend will know that the withdrawal agreement in its draft treaty form does contain agreed provisions on a joint committee. And that joint committee could be very much a forum for resolving the issue to which he alludes in that context. And I hope that that provides some reassurance that there is an element of governance which commands some confidence and legitimacy in this process. The government is committed to significantly, from March 2019, during the implementation period, the UK will not be a member state of the European Union. As a result, we will, for the first time in 40 years, have the freedom that we need to strike new trade deals with global partners. This is a freedom that builds on our long and proud history as a great trading nation and a champion of free trade with all parts of the world. Important work is already underway to maximise these opportunities. In July, the Department for International Trade launched its consultations to inform the government's approach to trade with the US, Australia, New Zealand, and potentially seeking accession to the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. I'm excited that these opportunities for the UK are drawing ever closer, Madam Deputy Speaker. To give effect to the implementation period in domestic law, the Withdrawal Agreement Bill must ensure that EU law continues to have the same effect in the UK as it does now for the duration of the implementation period. The House will be aware that the current mechanism by which EU law is brought into UK law is the European Communities Act 1972, which will be repealed on the 29th of March 2019 when we leave the EU as prescribed in the EU Withdrawal Act. This is a vital step in our exit. The bill will require a strictly time-limited transitional provision so that the legal effect of the ECA is saved until the 31st of December 2020, at which point the implementation period will end. This will reflect the UK's unique status as a country that has left the EU, but which, for a strictly time-limited period, will continue to apply EU law as it does now, to the benefit of citizens and businesses.
Minister for giving way. She is talking about an implementation period, but is it not the case that that is a misnomer, because it is far from clear what we will actually be implementing. She's going to ask Parliament to sign off on a process where there is no detail of what that future trading relationship is going to look like with the EU or indeed anywhere else, yet at a point we will be giving up our negotiating power within the EU. Is it not just a step into the unknown?
Well, I'm disappointed that the Honourable Lady isn't here to welcome the implementation period, which has been welcomed by many businesses, not only in her constituency, but throughout the UK, because it provides time and it provides certainty for many of the businesses in our country. And it will mean it is part of the withdrawal agreement. The withdrawal agreement is part of the final deal package, which contains, linked intricately to it, the future framework on the economic partnership. And together they are put to Parliament for the meaningful vote.
I thank the Minister very much for giving way. Does she agree with me that 90% of our global growth outside, in the future, will be with countries outside of Europe? And so can she clarify that during the implementation period, we will be in a position to start to benefit by signing trade deals from that potential growth?
Well, I welcome my honourable friend's optimism, because she is absolutely right. During the implementation period, for the first time in 40 years, the UK will have the ability to design and develop its own independent trade policy, with the freedom to sign, negotiate and ratify trade deals with countries outside of the EU. That is an important benefit, precisely because she says, and rightly, that 90% of global world product will be coming from outside the EU in the future, something that we need to maximise for our businesses and our citizens. The provisions in the bill in no way diminish the importance of the EU Withdrawal Act, which colleagues on all sides of this House worked so hard to scrutinise. That Act remains vital to the exit process, and any changes made to it by the Withdrawal Agreement Bill will not change its purpose. It was not appropriate for the Withdrawal Act to account for an implementation period. It needed to be passed without prejudice to negotiations to ensure a functioning statute book on exit day. Now that we have secured agreement to the implementation period, we must ensure it is given proper domestic legal effect, and this includes deferring the point at which some of the Withdrawal Act takes effect. Madam Deputy Speaker, I turn finally to the negotiated financial settlement, which covers the UK's financial commitments to the EU and the EU's financial commitments to the UK. It provides predictability to current recipients of EU funding, including farmers, businesses and academics, with the UK continuing to get receipts due under the current EU budget plan. I know that this is an issue of great importance to this House, Madam Deputy Speaker. We are a country which honours our international obligations, but it is important to recognise that the financial settlement was reached on the basis of both sides' commitment to reaching a deal. If one side fails to live up to its commitments, there will be consequences for the deal as a whole, and that includes the financial settlement. The bill will include a standing service provision that allows government to make payments due under the financial settlement. While the amounts to be paid will vary and are a function of the terms of the settlement, the bill will only allow payments to meet the financial commitments that are required by the Withdrawal Agreement. I know that Parliament will want to monitor these payments. It will be important to ensure the payment mechanism balances the government's legal responsibility to pay the financial settlement with Parliament's duty to scrutinise.
Well, on the question of the financial settlement, does she not agree with me that it would perhaps be more honest for the government at the same time to set out what the financial exposure of the UK to the European Union will be after the transition period, because then people will be able to assess whether this actually represents value for money?
Well, characteristically, the honourable gentleman seeks to focus on the negative and the pessimistic view of her, which he's well known for when it comes to Brexit. I don't sign up to his view of Brexit. I'm very optimistic about the opportunities and the benefits that this country will be standing to gain after we leave the EU and after the implementation period. And I encourage him to put his pessimism aside and get behind British businesses, get behind British exporters, and get behind Britain.
Will she get behind me? We're almost running out of time. It's definitely...
All right, I will.
I've forgotten the question.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've forgotten what... No. The Minister has just been suggesting that we might not end up paying the bill that has already been agreed, because until everything is agreed, nothing is agreed. That therefore means there is no guarantee that there will be a transition period from next year. That also means that the government surely must have some idea which passport controls British citizens will use in Europe and which passport controls European citizens will use here. If not, they're completely irresponsible.
Well, I admire his doggedness and his interest in passport queues. That information will be made public and set out by the government in due course. But when it comes to the agreement, of course, both sides are entering into an international treaty under customary international law, under the convention that regulates international treaties. Both parties will have to be bound by their duties that they sign up to. And if one party fails to adhere to its obligations, the other party will have the legal freedom to take appropriate countermeasures. And that is what the UK retains in this international treaty negotiation. Both sides are committed to agreeing the framework of the future relationship alongside the withdrawal agreement. But it is our firm view that the withdrawal agreement itself must include a commitment requiring the framework for the future relationship to be translated into legal text as soon as possible. I am pleased that this is now something we are taking forward in negotiations, and I know that the Secretary of State has raised this issue personally with Mr Barnier. I hope that I have made clear today, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this bill is vital in delivering our exit from the EU. It will protect the rights of individuals and families. It will give effect to the time-limited implementation period, ensuring continuity and certainty for businesses, and it will provide the appropriate means for paying financial settlement.
Grateful to the Minister. Under the trade section of her speech, she talked as if the UK was completely excluded from world trade as we sit here today, but in fact we are right at the heart of it through 65 bilateral trade deals between the EU and the rest of the world. Could the Minister tell us how many of those 65 bilateral trade deals will the UK be involved in when we leave the European Union?
Well, if the Honourable Gentleman studies the text of the withdrawal agreement, the withdrawal agreement legal text, he will see that we have agreed with the EU that the EU's bilateral, international trade agreements that it has around the world will continue to apply to the UK during the implementation period as if we were a member state. But what is important, and the reason why I'm so passionate and optimistic about Brexit and why I proudly campaign to leave the European Union, is that once we leave the customs union, once we leave the constraints of the common commercial policy, the common external tariff, it will be for this Parliament, our country, to determine our future of global trade and build on our rich and prosperous history in that regard. And that is an opportunity that I encourage the Honourable Gentleman to support. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are committed to getting this right. And I am confident that members on all sides of this House will be able to support the government on delivering the next step in leaving the European Union.
The question is that this House has considered legislating for the withdrawal agreement. Mr Matthew Pennycook.